The train ticket was small, barely 3 inches wide, and the ink was already smearing from the sweat on his fingers. Private James Clark was 19 years old, and he had exactly 45 seconds to live. He knew this. Everyone on that platform knew this. The guerrillas on horseback had made it very clear. But James Clark was not praying. He was writing. His hand shook so badly that the words came out crooked, the letters bleeding into each other on the thin paper. Around him, 23 other Union soldiers stood in their undergarments, stripped of their uniforms, stripped of their dignity, stripped of everything except the terror in their eyes. The September sun beat down on Centralia, Missouri, and somewhere behind him. A horse snorted impatiently. James Clark finished the last word, folded the ticket carefully, slipped it into the pocket of his underwear, the only clothing they had not taken. And then he looked up at the man they called Bloody Bill. What happened in the next 10 seconds would be remembered for 160 years, but what was written on that ticket, what a 19-year-old soldier chose as his final words to the world, that would not be discovered until days later, when they found his body in a ditch with 23 others. This is the story of those words, and the monster who gave him time to write them. But first, you need to understand how we got here, how a train full of unarmed soldiers became the site of one of the most brutal executions in American history, and why the man who ordered it believed he was delivering justice, because Bloody Bill Anderson was not born a killer. He was made into one, and the people who made him wore the same uniform as James Clark. We are going back 18 months, to August 1863, to a building in Kansas City that would change everything. But before that, before we understand the monster, we need to understand the victim. James Clark was born in Zanesville, Ohio, on March 15, 1845. His father was a blacksmith. His mother taught Sunday school. He had 2 younger sisters who adored him and a dog named Buster, who followed him everywhere. It was a simple life, a good life, the kind of life that existed in small towns across America before the war came and changed everything. James was 16 when Fort Sumter fell. He was 18 when he enlisted. In between, he had fallen in love. Mary Ellen Foster lived 3 houses down from the Clark family. She had auburn hair that turned gold in the summer sun and a laugh that could make James forget his own name. They had known each other since childhood, played together, grown up together, slowly realized that what they felt was something more than friendship. James asked her to marry him on Christmas Eve, 1862. He was 17 years old. She was 16. They were too young. Everyone said so. But the war was raging and young men were dying every day and no one knew how much time anyone had. Mary Ellen said yes, but she also said something else. She said she would not marry a coward. She said she would not spend her life with a man who hid while others fought. She said that if James loved her, really loved her, he would do his duty. James enlisted 3 weeks later. He spent the next 18 months learning to be a soldier. He marched, he drilled, he fired his rifle at targets that did not shoot back. He was sent to Missouri because that was where the army needed men, and he obeyed because that was what soldiers did. He wrote to Mary Ellen every week, long letters full of hope and plans and descriptions of a future they would build together. A house with a white fence, children, a dog like Buster. All the things that young people dream about when they are in love, and the world has not yet shown them how cruel it can be, Mary Ellen wrote back. She sent him a lock of her hair in a small gold locket. She told him to keep it close to his heart. She told him it would protect him. She was wrong, but James did not know that. Not yet. Not standing on that platform. Not until the guerrillas came and the guns came out, and he realized that the locket could not stop bullets. All it could do was identify his body. Now, let us go back to Kansas City, to the building that created Bloody Bill Anderson, to the moment that turned a young man into a monster. The building was never supposed to fall. That is what the Union commanders said afterward. An accident, structural failure, an unfortunate tragedy that killed 4 young women and crippled several others. Nothing more than bad luck and old architecture. But Bill Anderson knew the truth. He knew because his sister Josephine was one of those girls. She was 14 years old. She had been arrested for the crime of being related to a known bushwhacker. for having a brother who fought against the Union in the border wars. The military prison in Kansas City was full of such women and girls, mothers, sisters, daughters of Confederate guerrillas, hostages in a war that had forgotten the rules. The building that held them had been deliberately weakened. Union soldiers had removed key support beams from the structure days earlier. Witnesses saw them do it. Some say it was meant to intimidate, to send a message to the guerrillas. Others say it was meant to kill. What is certain is this. On August 13th, 1863, the building collapsed. Josephine Anderson was on the second floor when the walls came down. She did not die immediately. That would have been a mercy. Instead, she was trapped under rubble for nearly 6 minutes, her spine crushed, her legs shattered. Witnesses said they could hear her screaming. Some said she called for her brother. Others said she simply cried for her mother. By the time they pulled her body from the wreckage, Josephine Anderson was dead. She was 14 years old. She had never held a weapon. She had never hurt anyone. And she died in agony because her brother had chosen to fight. Bill Anderson was 23 years old when they told him. Something broke inside him that day. Something fundamental. Something human. The young man who had joined Quantrill's raiders to defend his home. The young man who had killed Union soldiers because it was war, and that is what war demanded. That young man ceased to exist. In his place stood something colder, something darker. Something that looked at Union blue and saw only the color of the rubble that had crushed his baby sister. Bill Anderson kept Josephine's dress, the one she had been wearing when the building fell. It was torn and stained with blood, her blood, and he folded it carefully and placed it in his saddlebag. He would carry it for the next 14 months, until the day he died. Remember that dress, we will come back to it. But there is something else you need to understand about what happened in Kansas City. Something the official reports do not mention. Something Bill Anderson discovered 3 days after his sister's funeral. The Union commander who ordered those support beams removed, the man directly responsible for Josephine's death, was never punished. He was never court-martialed. He was never even questioned. In fact, he was promoted, and his new orders, his new assignment, was to hunt down Confederate guerrillas in Missouri. He was coming for Bill Anderson, and Bill Anderson knew it. So Bill did something that would define the rest of his short life. He stopped fighting a war. He started fighting a vendetta, the rules of engagement, the codes of honor that even guerrillas observed. Bill Anderson threw them away. If the Union was going to kill 14-year-old girls and call it an accident, then Bill Anderson was going to show them what intentional looked like. The scalping started within a month. The first one was a Union scout caught alone on a road near Independence. Bill shot him through the chest, waited for him to die, and then, methodically, removed the top of his head. He did not do it out of hatred. He did not do it out of pleasure. He did it because he wanted the Union to understand. He wanted them to feel what he felt. He wanted them to look at their dead and see something other than soldiers fallen in battle. He wanted them to see horror. Within 3 months, Bill Anderson had 53 scalps braided into his horse's saddle. 53. The Union soldiers who would later capture that saddle could not bring themselves to count them. But Bill could. He knew every single one. Not by name. He rarely learned their names, but by the circumstances of their deaths. The scout near Independence, the sergeant at Richmond, the patrol at Arrow Rock. Each scalp was a message. Each scalp was a response. Each scalp said, "You killed my sister and I will never stop making you pay." But what does any of this have to do with James Clark and his train ticket? Everything. Because by September 1864, Bill Anderson had become the most feared man in Missouri. His band of guerrillas numbered over 80 men, including a 17-year-old named Jesse James, who would later become far more famous than his teacher. They moved like ghosts through the countryside, striking Union outposts and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. And then, Bill Anderson learned about the train, but here is something the history books often miss, something that makes what happened at Centralia even more tragic. The train was not supposed to stop there. The original schedule had the North Missouri Railroad bypassing Centralia entirely, a direct route from St. Joseph to Macon with no stops in between. But 3 days before September 27th, the schedule was changed. A bureaucrat in Jefferson City decided that Centralia needed a stop for mail delivery. A small change, a minor adjustment. The kind of decision that gets made in offices every day without anyone thinking about consequences. That decision killed 23 men. If the train had not stopped, if it had rolled through Centralia without slowing down, Bill Anderson and his guerrillas would have watched it pass. They would have cursed, they might have fired a few useless shots at the locomotive, and then they would have ridden away looking for other targets. James Clark would have arrived in Macon. He would have transferred to another train. He would have made it home to Ohio. He would have married Mary Ellen. He would have had the life he dreamed about. Instead, the train stopped, and everything changed. This is what war does. This is what all war does. It takes small decisions, schedule changes, troop movements, a left turn instead of a right, and transforms them into life and death. The men who died at Centralia did not die because of grand strategy or heroic sacrifice. They died because someone in an office decided the mail needed to be delivered. Remember that. Remember that every name on every war memorial represents a chain of small decisions that ended in tragedy. Remember that history is not made by great forces, but by tiny choices that no one notices until it is too late. Now, back to September 27th, 1864. Back to Centralia. Back to the moment when 80 guerrillas rode into town and waited for a train that should never have stopped. The North Missouri Railroad ran through Centralia every day at noon. Usually it carried civilians, supplies, and mail, but on September 27, 1864, it was carrying something else. 24 Union soldiers were aboard that train. They were not combat troops, they were not armed. They were enlisted men returning from leave, heading back to their units after visiting family. Some had wives, some had children. Some, like James Clark, had sweethearts waiting for them back in Ohio. They were on that train because someone in the Union Army had decided to consolidate troop movements through Missouri. Faster, more efficient, cheaper than individual travel. It was also more dangerous. But no one had told them that. Bill Anderson and his guerrillas rode into Centralia around 11 in the morning. The town had maybe 200 residents, farmers mostly, plus a few merchants. They scattered when they saw the horsemen coming. 80 men in butternut and gray, pistols drawn, the smell of gunpowder and leather filling the dusty streets. Bill did not come to burn Centralia. He came for the train. His men took positions around the station. They blockaded the tracks north and south of town. They settled in to wait. Some of them got drunk on whiskey stolen from the general store. Others played cards. A few rode through town, terrorizing civilians who had not fled fast enough. Bill Anderson sat on his horse at the edge of the platform. He did not drink. He did not play cards. He did not terrorize anyone. He simply waited. He was thinking about Josephine. He was always thinking about Josephine. The dress was in his saddlebag. 14 months old now, the blood long since turned brown and stiff, but he could still smell her on it sometimes. Still remember the way she used to laugh. Still see her face in his dreams, except now it was always twisted in pain, always screaming, always asking why he had not saved her. The train whistle broke his reverie. 12:03. The North Missouri Railroad was running 3 minutes late. Bill Anderson straightened in his saddle. His hand moved to the Navy Colt at his hip. The leather grip was warm from the Missouri sun. The metal cylinder was cold despite the heat. That contrast, warmth and cold, had become so familiar that he barely noticed it anymore. The train came around the bend, black smoke billowing from the engine, wheels screeching on iron rails. The engineer saw the blockade too late. By the time he tried to brake, guerrillas were already boarding from both sides. The passengers screamed. But Bill Anderson was not interested in passengers. He had already spotted the Union blue through the windows. 24 soldiers, unarmed, unprepared, returning from leave with nothing but the clothes on their backs and letters from home in their pockets. Letters from wives, letters from children, letters from mothers who did not know if they would ever see their sons again. Bill Anderson was about to answer that question. They pulled the soldiers off the train one by one, the passengers, the civilians. Bill let them go. "Take nothing," he told his men. "These are Missouri folks. They are not our enemies." The guerrillas grumbled but obeyed. Bill Anderson's authority was absolute. No one questioned him. No one dared. But the soldiers were lined up on the platform, 24 men in Union blue, standing in a row, their hands raised, their faces white with fear. They knew who had stopped their train. Everyone in Missouri knew about bloody Bill Anderson. Everyone knew about the scalps. Everyone knew that surrender meant nothing to a man who had stopped following rules 18 months ago. A sergeant named Thomas Goodman stood at the end of the line. He was 22 years old, from Hannibal, Missouri. He had joined the Union Army because he believed in the cause, believed that slavery was wrong, that the country should stay united, that some things were worth fighting for. Now he believed he was about to die. But Thomas Goodman was wrong. He was going to survive this day. He was going to be the only one. And the reason why? The reason Bill Anderson spared him while executing everyone else. That is one of the strangest details of the entire Centralia massacre. We will come back to Thomas Goodman, but first, Bill Anderson walked down the line of prisoners. His boots crunched on the wooden platform. His spurs jingled with each step, the 53 scalps on his saddle, visible to every soldier in that line. He swayed gently in the September breeze. He stopped in front of the first soldier, a private, young, maybe 18. His uniform was clean, too clean for combat. This boy had never fired a shot in anger. "Strip," Bill said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. The private did not move. Bill raised his pistol. "I said strip. Take off the uniform. All of it." The private's hands trembled as he reached for his buttons. One by one, the other soldiers followed. Coats came off first, then shirts, then trousers, then boots. Within minutes, 24 Union soldiers stood in their undergarments on the platform of Centralia station. Someone laughed. One of the guerrillas, a cruel sound. Bill did not laugh. Bill never laughed anymore. He collected the uniforms himself, passed them to his men. Good wool these, winter's coming. His voice betrayed nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just efficiency. A sergeant stepped forward, the one with 3 children. Asa Bloomer was his name. He fell to his knees in front of Bill Anderson. "Please, Ard," he said. "Please, I have 3 children, a boy and 2 girls. The youngest is only 4. She does not even understand where her father went. Please, let me go home to them. Let me see them one more time." Bill Anderson looked down at the kneeling sergeant. Something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been recognition, or memory, or pain. "How old?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. The sergeant looked up, hope flooding his face. "My boy is 9. My girls are 7 and 4. They are good children, please." Bill Anderson was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his saddlebag. His fingers found the familiar fabric, the torn dress, the brown stains, the smell of blood and dust and memory. "My sister was 14, Bill said. She never held a weapon. She never hurt anyone. Your army killed her anyway. Crushed her under a building and called it an accident." He tucked the dress back into the saddlebag. "I am sorry about your children, but I cannot let you go home to them. What happened next?" "No. Wait. We need to talk about James Clark." Private James Clark was 19 years old. He was from a small town in Ohio called Zanesville. He had enlisted in the Union Army in 1863, not because he was brave, but because the girl he loved, Mary Ellen Foster, had told him she would not marry a coward. So James Clark put on the blue uniform, learned to march, learned to shoot, learned to hate the rebels even though he had never met one. He was sent to Missouri because that is where the Army sent him. He was put on a train to Centralia because that was the route home from leave. Mary Ellen had given him a lock of her hair before he left. He wore it in a small locket around his neck. She had also given him a promise. When the war ended, they would marry. They would have children. They would build a house with a white fence and grow old together. That promise was in his mind when the guerrillas stopped the train. James Clark was standing near the middle of the line when Bill Anderson ordered them to strip. He removed his uniform like the others. He stood in his undergarments like the others. He felt the September sun on his bare shoulders and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was not going to see Mary Ellen again. But unlike the others, James Clark was carrying something, his train ticket. He had kept it in his coat pocket, thinking he might need it for the return journey. When they made him strip, he transferred it to his undergarments. A small act, almost unconscious, the instinct to hold on to something, anything, in a situation where everything was being taken away. Now, standing on that platform, watching Bill Anderson interrogate the sergeant with 3 children, James Clark realized something. He had a pen, a small pencil actually, tucked into the waistband of his underwear along with the ticket. He had forgotten it was there. He used it to write letters to Mary Ellen, and he had slipped it in with the ticket without thinking. No one had searched them. No one had thought to look beyond the uniforms. James Clark had paper, James Clark had a pencil, and James Clark had, maybe, 2 minutes before whatever was going to happen, happened. His hand moved slowly, carefully. The pencil found the ticket found a stable surface. His own thigh pressed flat against the fabric. Around him, chaos, guerrillas shouting, the sergeant weeping, Bill Anderson's cold voice cutting through the noise. James Clark began to write. The words came slowly at first. What do you say when you have 2 minutes to say everything? What do you put on a piece of paper barely 3 inches wide? He thought about Mary Ellen. He thought about his mother. He thought about the house with the white fence they would never build. He wrote 3 words, then 4 more. Then he heard Bill Anderson say the thing that would haunt every survivor, every witness, every historian who would study this day for the next 160 years. You have 10 seconds to make peace with your God. James Clark finished the last word, folded the ticket, slipped it into his pocket, and then came the guns. 23 men died on that platform. 23 Union soldiers, executed in their undergarments, shot at close range by guerrillas who had long since stopped seeing them as human. Some tried to run. They were shot in the back. Some tried to fight. They were shot in the chest. Some simply stood there frozen, unable to process what was happening until bullets ended their confusion. James Clark was one of the ones who ran. He made it 6 steps before a bullet caught him in the lower back. He fell forward onto the platform, his face striking the wood, his hands scraping against the rough grain. He was not dead yet. The bullet had missed his spine, had missed the vital organs, but he was bleeding badly. And he could not move his legs. A shadow fell over him. James Clark looked up. A guerrilla stood over him, pistol drawn, the barrel pointing directly at his face. The guerrilla was young, maybe 16. His hand was shaking. "Please," James whispered. "Please." The young guerrilla pulled the trigger. James Clark was 19 years old. He had a girl waiting for him in Ohio. He had dreams of a white fence and children. He had $67 in back pay coming to him. He had a mother who would cry for months when she learned what had happened. And he had a train ticket in his pocket with 7 words written on it in smeared ink. Words that would not be discovered for days. Words that would make a mother collapse when she read them. Words that a 19-year-old soldier had chosen as his last communication with a world that was taking everything from him. We will read those words soon, but first, we need to understand what happened after the platform. Because the Centralia massacre was not over. In fact, the worst was still to come, and the man responsible for what came next was not Bill Anderson. It was a Union major named A.V.E. Johnston, a man who should have known better, a man who had been warned, a man whose pride would kill 147 of his own soldiers before the sun went down. The Battle of Centralia was about to begin, and it would prove that sometimes. The greatest monsters wear blue. Major A.V.E. Johnston heard about the train attack around 1 in the afternoon. He was stationed in Paris, Missouri, about 40 miles from Centralia. He commanded the 39th Missouri Infantry, a mounted regiment of about 150 men. They were not cavalry. They were infantry who had been given horses for mobility. There is an important difference. Cavalry fought from horseback. They trained with sabers and pistols. They knew how to charge, how to wheel, how to fight at full gallop. Infantry fought on foot, even mounted infantry. They used their horses to get to the battle, then dismounted and formed lines. That was their training. That was their doctrine. That was the only way they knew how to fight. When Johnston heard that Bloody Bill Anderson had struck Centralia, he gathered his men immediately. "We are going after them," he announced. "Every able-bodied man mount up," one of his junior officers. A lieutenant whose name history has not preserved tried to warn him. "Sir," the lieutenant said, "Anderson has at least 80 men, maybe more. And they are guerrillas. They do not fight like regular troops. If we pursue them into open country..." Johnston cut him off. "I have 147 soldiers under my command. Trained men, disciplined men. We outnumber these bandits nearly 2 to 1. We will ride to Centralia. We will find them, and we will destroy them." The lieutenant tried again. "Sir, guerrillas do not stand and fight. They ambush, they retreat. They draw you into terrain where your numbers mean nothing. We should wait for reinforcements. We should." "Enough." Johnston's voice was sharp. "I did not ask for your opinion, Lieutenant. I gave an order. We ride in 10 minutes. The lieutenant said nothing more. What could he say? He was a junior officer. Johnston was the commander. And Johnston had made his decision. 147 men rode out of Paris that afternoon. Only 3 would return. Bill Anderson did not run from Centralia. This was unusual. Guerrilla tactics demanded hit and run, strike fast, disappear faster. That was how you survived against a larger enemy. That was how you kept fighting when the odds were against you. But Bill Anderson was not thinking about tactics that day. He was thinking about Josephine. He was thinking about the dress in his saddlebag. He was thinking about the 23 soldiers he had just executed, and how it still was not enough, how it would never be enough. When his scouts reported Union cavalry approaching from the east, Bill smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in months. "More," he said. His voice was quiet, almost dreamlike. "More of them coming." Good. His lieutenant, a man named Archie Clement, barely 5 feet tall but vicious beyond measure, looked at him with something approaching concern. "Bill, we should go. There is no profit in fighting them here. We got what we came for." Bill turned to him. The smile was gone. In its place was something Clement had never seen before, something that looked almost like hunger. "They killed my sister," Bill said. "I am not done." Clement wanted to argue. Clement knew the smart move was to vanish into the hills and live to fight another day. But Clement also knew Bill Anderson, knew that the man had stopped caring about survival a long time ago, knew that every day since Josephine died had been borrowed time. "What do you want to do?" Clement asked. Bill pointed to a ridge overlooking the town. A tree-lined, good cover, high ground. "We wait," he said. "We let them come, and when they are close enough..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Every guerrilla in his command knew what Bill Anderson did when Union soldiers got close enough. 80 men rode to the tree line and disappeared into the brush, and they waited. Major Johnston arrived in Centralia around 3 in the afternoon. What he found turned his stomach. The platform was covered in blood. 23 bodies lay where they had fallen, stripped to their undergarments, executed like animals. Some had been shot multiple times, some had been mutilated after death. The September sun had already begun its work, and the smell. The smell was something Johnston would remember until his dying day, which, as it happened, would be in about 2 hours. "Find them," Johnston ordered. His voice shook with rage. "Find them and bring me Anderson's head." His scouts fanned out. Within 30 minutes, they had spotted the guerrillas. There, on the ridge above town, maybe 80 men, just sitting there, waiting. The lieutenant approached Johnston. "Sir, they are not running. That means they want us to attack. It is a trap." Johnston's jaw tightened. "I do not care what they want. I have 147 men. They have 80. The mathematics is simple." "Sir," the lieutenant pressed, "they are guerrillas. They have repeating pistols. Navy Colts, maybe Remingtons. Each man carries 4, sometimes 6. They do not need to reload in a charge. Our men have single-shot rifles. We have to dismount to fire with any accuracy. If they charge US while we are dismounting," I said. Johnston's voice rose to a shout. "I do not care. Form the men. We are going up that ridge." The lieutenant fell silent. 147 men formed up at the base of the ridge. They began to climb. Their horses struggled on the steep terrain. Their rifles bounced awkwardly on their backs. Halfway up, Johnston gave the order. "Dismount. Form a firing line. We will meet them with disciplined volleys." The men began to climb off their horses. That was when Bill Anderson charged. 80 guerrillas came down that ridge like a wave of death. They did not form lines. They did not follow formations. They simply pointed their horses downhill and kicked. The slope gave them speed, the surprise gave them advantage, and the pistols. The pistols gave them everything else. Each guerrilla carried at least 4 revolvers. Some carried 6. That was 24 shots, a minimum, before anyone needed to reload, and at close range. At the gallop. They did not miss. Johnston's men were caught halfway between mounted and dismounted. Some were still in the saddle. Some had 1 foot on the ground. Some had their rifles raised, but no clear target in the chaos. The first volley from the guerrillas killed 30 men. The second volley killed 20 more. After that, it was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Johnston tried to rally his troops. "Reform," he shouted, "reform on me." But his voice was lost in the thunder of hooves and the crack of pistol fire. His men were scattering, running, dying. A guerrilla, later identified as Jesse James, rode directly at Major Johnston. He was 17 years old. He had a Navy Colt in each hand. He fired twice. Both shots hit. Johnston fell from his horse. He was not dead yet. He lay on the Missouri dirt, bleeding from wounds in his chest and shoulder, watching his command disintegrate around him. 144 men would die in the next hour. Only 3 would escape. Only 3 out of 147 would make it back to Paris to report what had happened. Bill Anderson rode up to where Johnston lay. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Bill reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out the dress, Josephine's dress. The blood had turned brown. The fabric was stiff with age and memory. "You see this?" Bill said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "This belonged to my sister. She was 14. Your army killed her, dropped a building on her head and called it an accident." Johnston coughed blood. His eyes were glazing. "I do not know anything about a girl." Bill nodded slowly. "No, you do not. None of you do. You kill our families, and you do not even remember their names." He drew his pistol. "I remember every single one of yours." The shot echoed across the Missouri hills. Major A.V.E. Johnston was dead. 147 men had ridden out of Paris that morning. 144 of them would never return. The pursuit lasted another hour. Bill Anderson's guerrillas chased the fleeing Union soldiers for miles across the Missouri countryside. Some of the soldiers tried to surrender. They were shot where they stood. Some tried to hide in farmhouses. The farmhouses were burned. Some made it to the timber along Young's Creek and thought they were safe. They were not safe. Jesse James, 17 years old, already hardened by 2 years of guerrilla warfare, led a group into the woods after them. The sounds of pistol fire echoed through the trees for 20 minutes. When Jesse emerged, his horse was flecked with blood that was not his own. "How many?" Bill asked him. Jesse shrugged. 8, maybe 9. They stopped running eventually. Bill nodded. That was all. No praise. No condemnation. Just acknowledgement. This was the education Jesse James was receiving. This was how you made a legend, or a monster. Sometimes there was not much difference. By the time the sun began to set, 144 Union soldiers were dead. Their bodies were scattered across 5 miles of Missouri farmland. Some would not be found for days. Some would never be identified. Some would become nothing more than numbers in a report. Unknown soldiers, killed in action, buried in unmarked graves. But the body count was not the most disturbing part. The mutilations were. Bill Anderson's men did not simply kill, they desecrated. Bodies were scalped, ears were cut off, fingers were removed. Some corpses were arranged in obscene positions as messages to whoever found them. The guerrillas had crossed a line that even warfare rarely crosses, the line between killing enemies and defiling the dead. Years later, survivors would try to explain it. They would talk about the brutality of the border war, about the atrocities committed by both sides, about how men who see enough horror eventually become numb to it, and then start creating their own. Bill Anderson watched it all without expression. He did not participate in the mutilations. He never had. Even in his darkest moments, even with 53 scalps on his saddle, Bill Anderson maintained a strange code. He killed. He did not play with the dead, but he did not stop his men either. Maybe he could not. Maybe the beast he had unleashed had grown beyond his control. Or maybe, deep down, he wanted the Union to see. He wanted them to understand that this was what they had created when they dropped a building on his sister. We will never know. Bill Anderson never explained himself. He never justified his actions. He simply did them and let history draw its own conclusions. And somewhere on the platform back in Centralia, in the pocket of a 19-year-old soldier named James Clark, a train ticket waited to be found. We are almost ready to read what it said, but first, there is one more person we need to talk about. One more story within this story. One man who should have died that day but did not. Thomas Goodman, the only survivor, and the reason Bill Anderson spared him, is one of the strangest details of the entire Centralia massacre. Thomas Goodman was 22 years old when he stood on that platform with 23 other Union soldiers. He was from Hannibal, Missouri, the same town that produced Mark Twain. He had blue eyes and brown hair and a scar on his left hand from a childhood accident with a farming tool. He had enlisted in the Union Army because he believed in the cause. He had been returning from leave because his unit needed him. Now, he was about to die. Or so he thought. When Bill Anderson walked down the line of prisoners, ordering them to strip, Thomas Goodman obeyed like the others. When Bill announced that they had 10 seconds to make peace with their God, Thomas Goodman closed his eyes and prayed like the others. But when the shooting started, nothing happened to Thomas Goodman. The men around him fell. The men in front of him fell. The men behind him fell, but no one fired at Thomas Goodman. No bullet found him. No guerrilla aimed his pistol in his direction. When the shooting stopped, Thomas Goodman was the only Union soldier still standing. He opened his eyes. Bill Anderson was staring directly at him. "You," Bill said, "come here." Thomas Goodman walked forward. His legs felt like water. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He was certain, absolutely certain, that he was about to be executed personally. That Bill Anderson had saved him for last, that whatever was coming would be worse than a quick bullet. "What is your name?" Bill asked. "Thomas." "Thomas Goodman, sir." Bill nodded slowly. "Where are you from, Thomas Goodman?" "Hannibal, sir." "Missouri." "Missouri." Bill's eyes narrowed. "You are from Missouri, and you fight for the Union." Thomas swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Why?" Thomas did not know what to say. What answer would keep him alive? What words would satisfy the most feared man in the state? Because I believed it was right, sir. The Union. The cause. I believed. He trailed off. Bill's expression had not changed. "You believed," Bill repeated. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out the dress, held it up so Thomas could see the bloodstains. "Do you see this, Thomas Goodman from Hannibal, Missouri?" "Yes, sir." "This belonged to my sister. Her name was Josephine. She was 14 years old. The Union Army arrested her because she was my sister. They held her in a building in Kansas City. Then they made the building fall down on purpose, and she died under the rubble, screaming for help that never came." Thomas Goodman said nothing. What could he say? Bill folded the dress carefully, put it back in the saddlebag. "I am not going to kill you, Thomas Goodman." Thomas blinked. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Sir?" "I am not going to kill you," Bill repeated. "I am going to let you live. Do you know why?" "No, sir." Bill leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I need someone to tell them. I need someone to go back to your commanders and describe what happened here. Every detail, every death, every scream. I need them to know that this is not war anymore. This is vengeance. And it will not stop until they have paid for every drop of my sister's blood." He straightened. "Go," he said. "Walk back to your lines. Tell them what you saw. Tell them who did this. And tell them." Bill Anderson is just getting started. Thomas Goodman walked. He walked past the bodies of 23 men who had been standing next to him minutes earlier. He walked past guerrillas who watched him go without raising their weapons. He walked down the road to Paris, Missouri, where the remnants of Johnston's command were still trying to understand what had happened. He walked for 6 hours, and when he finally arrived, when he finally found Union soldiers who had not been slaughtered, he told them everything. Just as Bill had demanded. Every detail, every death, every scream. Thomas Goodman lived to be an old man. He wrote about Centralia many times. He was called to testify at hearings and trials. He became the primary witness to one of the worst massacres of the Civil War. But there was one thing Thomas Goodman never knew, one detail that escaped him because he was not there when they found the bodies: the train ticket in James Clark's pocket. They found the bodies 3 days later, a Union burial detail sent from Jefferson City to clean up the massacre site. They arrived expecting horror, and they found it. 23 corpses, swollen, discolored, partially eaten by animals. The September heat had accelerated the decomposition. The smell was unbearable. The soldiers worked quickly. They wrapped the bodies in canvas. They loaded them onto wagons. They made lists of names where identification was possible. Private James Clark was identified by the locket around his neck, the one with Mary Ellen's hair inside. The gold was tarnished, but the inscription was still legible. JC plus MF 1863. The soldiers noted it in their report. One more detail for a family that would never be whole again. But then, someone found the ticket. A young corporal, barely older than James Clark had been, was preparing the body for transport when he noticed something in the undergarments. A small piece of paper, folded carefully, tucked into a pocket that should not have held anything. A train ticket, smeared with ink and blood and something else. Sweat, perhaps, or tears. The corporal unfolded it carefully and read 7 words. 7 words that a 19-year-old soldier had written while standing on a platform waiting to die. 7 words that had traveled in a dead man's pocket for 3 days through heat and decay and horror. 7 words that would break his mother's heart when they delivered them to her, along with her son's remains. The ticket said, "We are going to die. I love you." That was all. 7 words, no names, no explanation, no goodbye to Mary Ellen or his mother or anyone specific. Just, "We are going to die. I love you." The corporal who found the ticket was said to have wept. The other soldiers stopped their work and stood in silence. Someone made the sign of the cross. Someone else simply stared at the sky. "We are going to die. I love you." Those were James Clark's last words, written in the final moments of his life, written while guerrillas surrounded him, written while he knew, with absolute certainty, that he had less than a minute to live. He could have written anything. He could have written a curse, a plea, a prayer, a final message to Mary Ellen about the house they would never build, a letter to his mother about how proud he was to serve. Instead, he wrote the simplest truth, the most universal truth, the truth that any human being in his position would want the world to know. "We are going to die. I love you." The ticket was delivered to his mother 3 weeks later. Sarah Clark was 42 years old. She had gray in her hair and lines around her eyes and hands that had never stopped working since the day she was married. She had raised 3 children. She had buried a husband. She had watched her only son march off to war with a smile on his face and a locket around his neck. The official notification had arrived on October 5th, 1864. A telegram, 12 words. "We regret to inform you that Private James Clark was killed in action at Centralia, Missouri." 12 words. That was all they gave her. No details, no explanation, no comfort. Just 12 words that shattered everything she had left. Sarah Clark did not cry when she read the telegram. The neighbors said she simply folded it carefully, placed it in her apron pocket, and walked into her bedroom. She did not come out for 3 days. When she finally emerged, she looked 10 years older, but she was functioning again. She went back to work. She cooked meals. She taught Sunday school. She did all the things she had always done. But something was gone from her eyes, something that would never come back. Mary Ellen came to see her every day. The girl James had loved, the girl he had promised to marry. She brought food that Sarah did not eat. She offered comfort that Sarah could not accept. She sat in the parlor and talked about James, about his laugh, his dreams, the future they had planned together. Sarah listened. She nodded. She said the right things. But inside she was hollow. Inside, there was nothing but the echo of 12 words. Then the package arrived, 3 weeks after the telegram. A small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a gold locket, tarnished, bent, with a dark stain on the chain that Sarah knew was blood. There was also a letter from the captain of James's unit, expressing condolences and explaining the circumstances of his death. And there was a train ticket, folded carefully, smeared with ink. 7 words written in handwriting that Sarah knew better than her own. She unfolded it slowly. Her hands were shaking. Her breath was coming in short gasps. She read the words once, twice, 3 times. "We are going to die. I love you." Sarah Clark collapsed. They found her on the floor of the parlor, the ticket clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face for the first time since the telegram arrived. The neighbors had to carry her to bed. The doctor was called. Mary Ellen stayed with her for a week. But the ticket changed everything. But the ticket showed her something the official notification never could. It showed her that, in his final moments, surrounded by death and terror and chaos, James Clark had thought of love. Not hatred, not fear, not revenge. Love. That is what he wanted the world to remember about him. That is what he wanted, written on a small piece of paper that might never be found. That is what mattered to a 19-year-old soldier who had 60 seconds to summarize his entire existence. "We are going to die. I love you." The ticket was passed down through the Clark family for generations. It became a kind of sacred object, a connection to a young man who never got to grow old. Eventually, it was donated to a museum in Ohio, where it sits today behind glass. The ink faded but still legible after 160 years, and if you ever find yourself in that museum, if you ever stand in front of that glass case and read those 7 words, think about what you would write. Think about 60 seconds. Think about a piece of paper barely 3 inches wide. Think about everything you have ever done, everyone you have ever loved, every dream you have ever had, and try to fit it all into 7 words. Because that is what James Clark did. That is his legacy. Not a soldier's death, not a number in a massacre, not a name on a list. 7 words. We are going to die. I love you. Bill Anderson died 5 weeks after Centralia. On October 26, 1864, he rode into an ambush near Albany, Missouri. Union soldiers were waiting for him, hundreds of them. And this time, there was no ridge to charge down, no surprise to exploit, no advantage of any kind. Bill took 4 bullets, 2 to the head, 2 to the chest. He fell from his horse and died in the Missouri dirt, 24 years old, with 53 scalps still braided into his saddle and his sister's bloody dress still in his saddlebag. The Union soldiers mutilated his corpse. They cut off his trigger finger as a souvenir. They photographed his body and sent the image to newspapers across the country. They displayed him in Richmond, Missouri for 3 days, where civilians came to spit on him and women came to stab his flesh with kitchen knives. Bill Anderson had become a monster, and when he died, the world treated him like one. But here is the thing about monsters. Every one of them was human once. Every one of them had a moment when they were not what they became, a moment when they were young and hopeful and capable of love, a moment before the world broke them. Bill Anderson's moment was August 13, 1863, the day the building fell, the day his 14-year-old sister died screaming under rubble, the day something inside him snapped and never healed. Does that excuse what he did? No. Does that explain what he did? Perhaps. Does that make him sympathetic? That is for you to decide. But consider this. Every year on September 27th, someone visits James Clark's grave in Zanesville, Ohio. No one knows who. The cemetery groundskeeper has tried to catch them for decades. They always come early in the morning, before dawn, and they always leave the same thing. A train ticket. Not the original, of course. The original is in the museum, but a replica. A small piece of paper with 7 words written in careful script. We are going to die. I love you. The groundskeeper found the first one in 1965, exactly 100 years after the war ended. He thought it was vandalism at first, but then he read the words, and he looked at the grave, and he understood. Someone was remembering. Someone, somewhere, had heard the story of James Clark and decided that it mattered. decided that a 19-year-old soldier who wrote 7 words on a train ticket deserved to be remembered. Decided that love, even love expressed in the shadow of death, should not be forgotten. The tickets have appeared every year since. 47 of them. 47 years of remembrance. 47 silent tributes to a young man who had 60 seconds to summarize his existence and chose love. That is the legacy of James Clark. Not the massacre, not the war, not the politics or the violence or the hatred that consumed Missouri in 1864. Love, 7 words. 160 years. An unknown visitor who returns every September to say, "I remember. Your story matters. You mattered. We are going to die. I love you." History is full of monsters. History is full of battles. History is full of statistics and body counts and dates that school children memorize and forget. But sometimes history is also full of love. You have just experienced one of the most brutal chapters in American history. The kind they do not teach in schools because there are no heroes, no villains, just humans doing terrible things to other humans and calling it war. Stories like this take time to research and tell properly. When you click Super Thanks, you are not just supporting a channel, you are saying, "This history matters. Every contribution helps us uncover more forgotten stories, more buried truths, more moments that deserve to be remembered." James Clark wrote 7 words on a train ticket before he died. "We are going to die. I love you." What would you write? What would matter to you in your final moments? Family, love, revenge, forgiveness, something else entirely? Comment below. Tell us. Because maybe, just maybe, thinking about that question now will help you live differently tomorrow. History remembers the monsters. History remembers the battles. But sometimes, history should remember the 7 words a 19-year-old boy wrote while waiting to die. We are going to die. I love you. Remember that. Live accordingly.